In the weeks leading up to the 12th of November 2024, I dedicated time to preparing for an experience that I knew would evoke a wide range of emotions that differ for everyone. This preparation included attending an orientation seminar where we explored the historical context of the Holocaust. However, no amount of learning could truly prepare us for the profound impact of witnessing first-hand evidence of mass genocide, the largest and most harrowing atrocity ever endured by humanity. In the early hours of the 12th of November, Mrs. Johnson met me and Julia at Newcastle Airport for a flight to Krakow in Poland. As we boarded the plane, we carried with us a sense of anticipation, still sheltered by a degree of innocence and unaware of the depth of the lessons awaiting us that day. Upon arrival, we were greeted by harsh, cold weather. As we passed through customs and stepped out of the terminal towards our coach, we couldn't help but reflect on the freedom we often take for granted. The simple freedom to walk wherever we please. It was a freedom that countless minorities, the majority being Jewish, could only dream of within the barbed fences of Auschwitz. Our first destination was Auschwitz I, the site where prisoners were forced to carry out grueling manual labour. To reach their daily tasks, they walked several miles every morning and evening from the barracks. As we entered the camp, we passed under the iconic sign bearing the chilling words, "Work makes one free." A plaque reminded us of the unimaginable suffering endured here. Thousands of prisoners left this way for hours-long hard labour. In the evening they returned to camp, completely exhausted, carrying the bodies of those who had perished. Walking through the complex was a deeply haunting experience. The silence, the solemn atmosphere, and the oppressive surroundings seemed to echo the unimaginable horrors that once unfolded here. We were led by a tour guide into Block 4, a building that houses harrowing evidence of the atrocity known as the Holocaust. Behind glass displays, we saw remnants of this dark chapter in history. Rows of empty canisters once held the lethal gas used to murder those condemned. Hundreds of pairs of glasses, each a silent testament to the individual who once wore them. Jewish prayer shawls, sacred and now separated from their owners, served as a poignant reminder of their lives lost. What struck me most was the corridor filled with medical devices, crutches, braces, and artificial limbs. Among them you can see in this photo was a prosthetic leg, strikingly similar to the one I wear today. It reminded me of the first prosthetic legs I was given after my accident, plain and unadorned. This sight resonated with me deeply and affected me emotionally more than any other part of the visit. It was a stark reminder that under Hitler's Nazi ideology, anyone who did not conform to their twisted version of perfection, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and Aryan, was deemed unworthy of life. They sought to erase what they saw as imperfections. I couldn't help but recall the words of my former swimming teacher, Keith Hall, who told me never to think of my condition as a disability, but instead as an ability. This was the most challenging part of the experience for me, so much that the Holocaust Education Trust's leaders advised me beforehand that I might not want to go into this exhibit. But I felt it was necessary to confront the reality of this history, no matter how painful, and that is why I chose to enter. The next room contained thousands of shoes, each one unique in shape and size, once belonging to an individual. They were piled behind glass, forming a hill, almost a mountain, on either side of a room. Among them were also children's shoes. It was a truly awful sight, a powerful reminder of the cruelty humanity is capable of. Evidence of mass genocide, displayed so starkly, drives home an undeniable truth. This must never happen again. I chose not to photograph this part of the experience, as I was overwhelmed by the sheer quantity of hair, bundles upon bundles, all behind glass. In a similar room I learned a fact I hadn't known before. The Nazis shaved the hair off their victims as part of the exploitation, driven by greed and capitalism. The hair was to be sold and woven into items like socks, hats, and other clothing accessories. When you consider how much hair a single person has, it may seem insignificant, but seeing these vast piles of hair, each bundle representing a life, a person who had no choice in their fate, was a stark and harrowing reminder of the thousands of innocent individuals whose dignity and humanity were stripped away. Next, I bore witness to the belongings of the Holocaust victims. Piles upon piles of cases. The reason families brought these cases with them was because, in most instances, they were told by the authorities to meet at the station for a specific time on a particular day and month. They were told they were being relocated, but had no idea where or for how long. Naturally, just as we do when we travel, they brought their most treasured possessions, identification, documents, and other items that were important to them. But upon arrival at Auschwitz, these belongings were discarded in a heap. Many of their owners were killed shortly after their arrival or sent to forced labour, their lives and stories reduced to these discarded items. The next two plaques explained how each minority group was marked with a distinct label, making it easier for the guards to identify them. For example, political prisoners, those resisting the Nazi regime, wore a red patch. Homosexuals were marked with a pink patch, while Jehovah's Witnesses and other religious dissenters wore a purple patch. These labels were part of a dehumanizing system, which also included the identification of Jewish individuals. We also saw the prison-style clothing that was issued to the prisoners, a sobering reminder of the uniformity and dehumanization they endured. Additionally, there was an entire corridor lined with photographs of the prisoners, taken for identification and documentation purposes. This practice was carried out during the earlier stages of the war. However, as the mass murder and genocide escalated towards the end of World War II, such documentation was largely abandoned. The scale of the atrocities grew so immense that even this grim form of record keeping ceased. The next two exhibits we encountered were deeply impactful. One was a series of plaques, including a map illustrating the Jewish population in Europe and the Mediterranean basin before the Holocaust. A total of 10,813,540 individuals. The other exhibit was the Book of Names, which records 6 million of those who were murdered during the Holocaust. Each name is accompanied by any known key detail about the individual. This book is so vast that it spans the entire room it is kept in, a striking testament to the sheer scale of the tragedy. One of the final parts of Auschwitz I that we visited was the site of the gallows where Rudolf Hess, the commandant of Auschwitz during the Holocaust, was executed. While awaiting trial, Hess wrote detailed notes about his role in the atrocities, providing chilling insights into his actions and his lack of remorse. Despite being responsible for unimaginable suffering, Hess claimed that his only regret was not spending more time with his family. Hess lived with his family near Auschwitz, and after a 3-week trial, he was sentenced to death. I vividly remember one of the educators sharing that his wife had written a letter saying that living there was some of the happiest years of her life. The final part of Auschwitz I that we visited was the gas chamber. I chose not to take any photos here, as the experience was profoundly surreal and didn't feel entirely appropriate. What I remember most vividly was the underground room with its cold concrete walls, marked with the scratches and imprints left by prisoners in their desperate attempts to escape. These marks bore silent testimony to the unimaginable suffering they endured in their final moments, as the gas took hold, leading to suffocation. In the adjacent room, we saw the furnaces where the victims' bodies were burned, one after another. It was a haunting and harrowing sight, a stark reminder of the scale and brutality of the genocide. We then took the coach to Auschwitz-Birkenau, the more recognisable part of the camp, with its iconic and intimidating watchtower standing over the entrance. Once inside, we saw the railway coaches that were used to transport prisoners, sometimes for days or even weeks, with some arriving from as far away as Italy. These cramped coaches had no seating, leaving people to stand in unbearable conditions. Often there was only one bucket for many individuals to use for their bodily needs. When the doors of these wagons were finally opened, prisoners faced immediate chaos. We stood at the very site where men and women were separated upon arrival. I remember Mrs. Johnson remarking how her son is a mummy's boy, and how he would have wanted to stay with her, an observation that brought the horror of such separations into sharp focus. Families, siblings, partners and friends were torn apart constantly. Some were sent to different barracks for forced labour, whilst others were sent directly to the gas chambers. This brutal selection process was based on factors such as age, pregnancy, disability, or perceived productivity. If someone was deemed not worthy of feeding for the amount of work they could perform, they were sent to their death. We also visited the barracks where prisoners were forced to sleep on wooden bunks without mattresses. These barracks were originally adapted from German field stables, designed to hold 51 horses. They were instead crammed with over 400 prisoners. The overcrowding and unsanitary conditions were unbearable, evoking parallels to the horrific conditions endured by slaves during their transportation across the Atlantic. No space, no dignity, and unimaginable suffering. By this point in the experience, the temperatures had dropped to around -5 degrees. It felt bitterly cold, and yet the guides reminded us that this was only autumn. During the winter months, the temperatures would often plunge to around -15 degrees. It's difficult to fathom the torment endured by those imprisoned in Auschwitz, forced to survive in such harsh and unforgiving conditions, with inadequate clothing, food, or warmth. In the final moments of our visit, we saw the ruins of two main gas chambers where countless Holocaust victims were murdered. These structures had been destroyed, reduced to rubble, as part of the Nazis' attempt to hide the evidence of their atrocities as the war neared its end. At this solemn site, we were joined by a guest from London, Rabbi Shaw, who led a short ceremony. He shared the powerful and deeply personal story of his grandfather, who was a victim of the Holocaust. The ceremony concluded with a poignant prayer in Hebrew. I was honoured to be invited to light a candle in remembrance of the millions who had lost their lives. This moment of reflection stayed with me as we made our way back to the airport, marking an end of an experience that I will never forget. A long and difficult day came to an end, and as we journeyed home, we carried with us the memories of the evidence of mass genocide, memories that must never be forgotten. Now, as I take on this new role as a Holocaust Ambassador for the Holocaust Education Trust, It is my mission to share this history with others. We must never forget what happened 80 years ago, because if we do, we risk repeating it. With far-right politicians rallying for power, we run the risk of groups becoming marginalised again. We must recognise the dangers of allowing groups to become persecuted. These memories will remain engraved in my mind forever. The inconvenience I feel from reflecting on this experience is but a minuscule fraction compared to the unimaginable suffering endured by the victims of the Holocaust.